Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Janet Yellen pinched friendshoring to India on her first official visit to the country as US Treasury Secretary. The meeting comes days ahead of India taking up the presidency of the G20. Yellen met Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and said that economic and financial ties were a crucial part of the Indo-US partnership. The Finance Minister said that the meeting will lend vigor to economic ties between the nations. Let's listen in to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman when she was meeting Janet Yellen, and also excerpts and pictures of Janet Yellen's visit to the Microsoft headquarters in Noida.
Our meeting today will lend greater vigor to our economic relationship, strengthen business-to-business links, and facilitate coordinated policy stance to address the pressing global economic challenges. The 9th meeting of the EEFP is also being held against the backdrop of India preparing to assume the G20 presidency.
At a time when the United States is focused on countering the economic consequences of the Ukraine-Russia war and China's dominance over supply chains, the country's Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, made an important visit to India. Yellen started her day with a 90-minute visit to Microsoft's India headquarters, interacting with industry leaders and software engineers. In her remarks to the press, she lashed out at President Putin and said that stopping the war would be the best thing for the global economy.
Take Russian energy exports. Russia has long presented itself as a reliable energy partner. But for the better part of this year, Putin has weaponized Russia's natural gas supply against the people of Europe. It's an example of how malicious actors can use their market positions to try to gain geopolitical leverage or disrupt.
The Treasury Secretary referred to friendshoring 6 times in her 20-minute speech, outlining the US strategy to secure supply chains and diversifying them beyond China.
Or disrupt trade for their own gain. The United States is pursuing an approach called friendshoring to diversify away from countries that present geopolitical and security risks to our supply chain. To do so, we're proactively deepening economic integration with trusted trading partners like India. Our strategy will also create redundancies in our supply chain to mitigate over-concentration risks.
Referring to democratic values more than 10 times in her speech, Yellen said that democracies are at an inflection point.
We're living at a critical time for the cause of freedom around the world. Democracies require our constant attention and nurturing. It's important for all democracies to renew our commitment to civil liberties and human rights, including for all our minorities at home and abroad.
Yellen highlighted that US will work closely with India in the G20 for meaningful debt relief, addressing the climate crisis, making cross-border payments cheaper, and reducing frictions to the flow of data. Secretary Yellen said that India-US ties are strong and will only deepen over time. Her message was very clear that US would like to vigorously pursue economic integration with India, and India is a critical partner for implementing the US vision on secure and reliable supply chains. With video journalist Rajinder from the Microsoft headquarters in Noida, this is Parikshit Luthra. All right, let's open this up. We're joined by Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, Jayant Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador to the World Trade Organization, also with us. Ambassador Meera Shankar, there we had Secretary Yellen speaking about friendshoring, saying that we need to counter countries like Russia, which are weaponizing trade, weaponizing energy. We need to stop over-reliance on China, need to form an alliance of friendly, like-minded countries. How can this be done? And how seriously would the US be pursuing this with India?
Well, if you look at what the Quad has decided, amongst the areas they want to take action on is the new Indo-Pacific economic framework. And the second is, reliability of critical supply chains. So both these aspects really are very much a part of the Quad agenda. Now, how seriously will it be implemented? I think we have to wait and see, but we are already seeing that, for instance, Apple has moved quite a bit, or at least a certain percentage of its manufacturing to India, with all its subcontractors having set up manufacturing facilities in India and now also exporting from India. So there is a window of opportunity for India to try and build itself as an alternative, because all countries are interested in de-risking monopoly supply chains, which can get disrupted either because of things like the pandemic, as we saw earlier, or because of geopolitical animosities. So this emphasis by the US on friendshoring and by Janet Yellen on friendshoring is something that would benefit India if we are able, in practical terms, both countries, to ensure that this doesn't remain at the level of rhetoric, but we actually work to try and concretize specific deals in specific sectors. And I think that's the challenge for both countries.
That's an important point, Ambassador Shankar. Let me get in Ambassador Dasgupta at this point. Ambassador Dasgupta, would the US be urging India to join a trade partnership such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? Would you see any concrete measures arising out of this discussion today on friendshoring, forming a friendly alliance?
I think Janet Yellen has made it quite clear that the US would like India to be a part of the IPEF trade framework, of which India now has observer status only. And she has linked it up with this concept of friendshoring, that this secure supply chain with Asia, on which in which the US will also participate. This will be the core intention of the US in having this Indo-Pacific economic framework up and going. So that is that goes without saying. As far as having a larger free trade agreement with the US is concerned, she has not expressed any views on that. But as is commonly known, the US is quite keen to have a free trade agreement with India because it has one with Japan already, it has one with Australia, it has one with Korea, and amongst the large economies in the Indo-Pacific, India is the only one which is still not integrated, so to say, economically to the same extent as Japan and Korea and Australia and Singapore and the other ASEAN countries are. So that would be very much of a piece with the US's thinking, especially in view of the geopolitical risks that the global economy is facing, and the US economy in particular is facing, because of China's dominance of the supply chain, because it is occupying such a position that it can control the supply chains for a very large number of industries.
Right. Ambassador Meera Shankar, coming back to you on the question of Russia. So Russia came up several times during her 20-minute speech. She said that this should be the single biggest priority for world leaders, and this would be the best thing to save the global economy if we're able to stop Putin's war against Ukraine. How do you think this would have unfolded in the meeting with Nirmala Sitharaman ahead of her visit? There were also a talk about how US might emphasize or urge India to accept a price cap on Russian oil.
Well, I think, we have made our position on this fairly clear, that we will buy oil based on our own advantage, and that the oil that we buy is far less than the oil and gas, say, for instance, that Europe or China buy from Russia. So I think that's an issue on which we are still engaged with the United States, though the United States has made clear that India has not violated any sanctions in its energy purchases from Russia. Secondly, I would say that we entirely agree with the sentiment expressed by Janet Yellen that the best way to end this kind of price that the whole world is paying in terms of higher energy costs, higher food costs as a result of the conflict in Ukraine is to have talks for settling or resolving issues and bringing about an end to the conflict. That is actually what India has been urging since day one. And more recently, we have seen that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has been in touch with his Russian counterpart and has also nudged President Zelensky not to rule out negotiations completely. And so if we see what is happening in the US, that the Republicans could, we don't know as yet for certain, but they could take control of the House, maybe even the Senate, though the Senate could go also for the Democrats. It's hanging in the balance. Then we are likely to see pressure build up for more questions about military aid and economic aid to Ukraine at this juncture, when the US economy itself is facing high pressures from inflation. So hopefully things move ahead towards negotiations. And what I can say is that we entirely agree with Janet Yellen that if we can find a way to end this conflict through negotiations and diplomatic dialogue, then that would be the best way forward for the world to resolve some of the extreme economic problems that it is facing today.
Right. Ambassador Dasgupta, on the question of democracy, we were looking at the speech.
If I may also just add caveat to what Ambassador Dasgupta says, and that is that the US would like greater economic integration with India and India participating in the India-Pacific Economic Framework, but there is absolutely no appetite for free trade agreements in the US. You saw President Trump walk out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and nobody in the US, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans, are putting any free trade agreements on the agenda as a matter of priority today. In fact, the mood is, swinging in the opposite direction, that, as Trump used to say, other countries have taken a free ride through these free trade agreements with the US, et cetera, et cetera. So the mood is certainly not for free trade agreements right now.
Okay. Coming back to the G20 focus, Ambassador Dasgupta, what do you think will be the key priorities? Here you had Janet Yellen speaking about a debt restructuring framework, saying how China has made sure that this restructuring framework, which had been agreed upon previously at G20, has not been able to work effectively, about the need to surge ahead with the climate agenda, strengthening multilateral institutions. So what do you think will be the priority when US and India start working together on the G20 during India's presidency?
As far as Janet Yellen is concerned, the US has mentioned debt restructuring for the poor and middle-income countries, which are facing this double headwind in terms of inflation, in terms of high food and oil prices, etc. So this community framework, in which China has not really participated or cooperated of the G20, which was moving in this direction. The US would like India to take the leadership of the G20 on this point and provide relief to the poor and the middle income countries which are reeling under this debt burden. That is point one. The second issue is about climate change. Now, as we speak, the talks are going on in Sharm el Sheikh, and there is a confrontation between the developing and the developed countries about the costs which the poorer countries or the developing countries have had to bear because of climate change. And as we all know, the $100 billion fund, which was supposed to be set up primarily on through the contributions of developed countries for transfer of technology, that has also not really seen the light of the day. The contributions have been very little, far, far lower than expectations. So there is this dilemma. The US would like India to take the leadership. There have been talks that India and China must also contribute to whatever economic costs the poorer countries have borne, and to compensate for that. But that, I think, has not really been grabbing the headlines yet. So we have to keep our ears to the ground and watch as to which way the COP meeting decisions are going. The third issue on G20,
Dasgupta,
where I think
I'll have to leave it there, sir. I'll have to leave it there. Yeah, we've run out of time, unfortunately, Ambassador Dasgupta, but thank you for joining us. We'd like to thank Ambassador Meera Shankar as well. We have to take a short break at this point, but when we return, we will get you more news and updates when we return on travel and tourism as well. Welcome back. You're watching Newscentre. A CNBC-TV18 news break has been confirmed. 13 players are in the race to acquire future retail, including Reliance and Adani. Ritu Singh, who broke this story last night, is here with the details. Ritu, what more are you picking up from your sources?
Well, thanks for that. The biggest names in corporate India, from Reliance to Adani, are vying for the assets of future retail under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. We had reported this earlier, and it is now official. We understand there were 16 EOIs that were submitted, but only 13 plus one, which is still under consideration, have been finalized. Some of the players have dropped out and the others did not make the cut. Now, Reliance's bid is hardly a surprise, given it was already in talks with future retail to acquire its assets, a deal which, of course, did not materialize because of legal issues. Adani is a surprise entry here, and it is bid through a joint venture which is called April Moon Retail Private Limited, a JV between Adani Airport Holdings and the promoters of Flamingo Group. Then you have other names like Nalva Steel, which is an OP Jindal Group company, Capri Global Holdings, and some lesser known names as well, like Dharampal, Satyapal, Shalimar Corporation, and so on. Now, in terms of what assets future retail still has, which is a big question mark, according to EOI documents, it still has access to around 302 leased retail stores, which includes about 30 large format stores like your big bazaars and 272 small format stores across the country. But remember, there are claims of over 21,000 crores from the financial creditors alone. So we'll have to see how many of these bidders actually, submit binding bids when it comes to it. November 20th is by when we're expecting the final list of suitors to be drawn up, and from there the bids will be then invited.
All right, thanks, Ritu, for that news break. Let's move on and focus on international travel and tourism, which is seeing a strong demand this winter festive season. CNBC-TV18 learns that be it tourist, students or business travelers, demand is high across categories. Danish Anand joins us now. Danish, what are the trends that you're picking up?
Well, travel portals are seeing a good demand for both domestic as well as for international travel. Ease My Trip and Make My Trip are seeing a significant growth on the back of revenge travel, pent-up demand, wedding season, New Year's and Christmas. So this winter season, we are seeing that Indians are majorly flying to the UK, they're flying to Bali, they're flying to Thailand. And as far as domestic demand is concerned, Make My Trip have confirmed to CNBC-TV18 that the demand has rebounded from 100%. So we can see, if we compare this data from pre-COVID level. The domestic demand, especially the domestic leisure demand, has rebounded in a major way, and Indians locally are traveling to Goa, Puducherry. These are certain areas where Indians are traveling to. But if we talk about VFS Global, which is one of the major players for visa applications, they have said that there is a good demand for all kinds of visas, and especially they're seeing a new trend that the certain countries that have eased the visa norms and certain countries that are promoting visa on arrival, those countries are seeing a great demand of Indian tourists. But all in all, if we see, the travel and tourism industry is counting a lot on the upcoming winter festive season. We do understand that the aviation industry has certain grounded aircrafts, but all the travel portals and VFS Global have confirmed to us that they're not seeing any effect of the aviation issue right now, but there is a strong demand for domestic as well as for international travel.
All right. Thanks, Danish, for joining us and telling us about all the international and domestic travel trends as of now. In fact, Danish also caught up with Christoph Schnellmann, the CEO of the Noida International Airport. He says that the first phase of the airport will become functional by 2024, adding that trials would begin 4 to 6 months before the handover. Here's a slice of that conversation.
We're on schedule to deliver Noida International Airport by the end of 2024, as per our agreement. We've started 4 months ago. We've awarded the EPC contracts to our partners, to Tata Project. They've since mobilized on site. They've mobilized men, they've mobilized machinery. They've begun excavation works on the terminal building, on the runway, on the ATC tower. They've begun to establish site logistics and accommodation for workers, and we're on track to deliver the infrastructure as per schedule.
Right. So globally, we are seeing that commodity prices are shooting up and they're pretty much volatile right now. So what is the impact of such high cost, and how are you managing it?
So we've we've agreed our EPC contracts on a fixed time, fixed cost basis, and we're confident that we'll be able to deliver the airport's infrastructure with the funding that has been sanctioned by our lenders and by our shareholders, that we'll be able to deliver the infrastructure for the 5,730 crore rupees.
Right. Sir, when can we expect the trials to start? Like you said that the airport has to be completed by 2024, but what is the target date for the trials to begin?
So we'll begin trials in 2024, at least 4 to 6 months before the airport commences operations. We'll begin with simple trials and tests of individual systems, and we'll develop to increasingly complex trials of interrelated airport systems.
All right, so Noida International Airport, the first phase of the same will come up as scheduled. Moving on to China now, the country has eased some of its COVID quarantine time restrictions. The move comes after Chinese President Xi Jinping led his new Politburo Standing Committee in a meeting on COVID. Eunice Yoon gets us more.
Chinese leadership, anyway, has described this as optimizing the COVID controls, but that they are unwaveringly sticking by the zero COVID policy. Now, either way, the market has interpreted this as an easing, and there is some positive developments. For example, for any foreign executive who might want to come into China, now the government quarantine is only 5 days in a hotel. That's appointed by the government, as opposed to 7 days, so a shorter period, and then another 3 days if you have a home here to be monitored there. And then you'd only have to take 1 negative COVID test, a 48-hour instead of 2. And then finally, it might be easier for you to catch a flight here, because the policy that U.S. airlines as well as other foreign airlines really found unreasonable by China is the circuit breaker policy, which was that China would suspend flights if there are infections that were detected on those flights. So that policy is now over, and there's also some positive developments for those of us who live in China. First of all, some of the more extreme measures are being mitigated. So, for example, the positive cases and their close contacts are still rounded up, but the close contacts of the close contacts are now no longer rounded up and put into government isolation. The risk is redefined, so it's now high and low as opposed to high, medium, and low. And the point of that is that fewer people, in theory, will be put on lockdown. And then there's supposed to be the citywide mass testing is going to be discouraged. So all of that is a positive development that's being sent a signal being sent, but at the same time, people aren't really sure how these are all going to play themselves out and whether or not it really gets to the underlying problem with zero COVID, at least when it comes to the economy, and that is, will it solve the uncertainty that zero COVID creates?
Eunice Yoon, thank you very much for joining us with the latest on COVID restrictions in China. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Newscentre, but don't go anywhere. News continues right here on CNBC-TV18.